with Melissa Carson, and we're going to be talking about why leading is an art. I always love talking about leadership. It's a wonderful thing that seems to change all the time, and I love getting people's perspective of it. And I always walk away from a chat like this, Melissa, learning something. So I'm so looking forward to this. I always ask this question. First question I always ask people is, where can people find you?
Sure. I would say two places. LinkedIn is always a good place to find me. I'm probably listed as Melissa Carson, and I post there regularly. The other place to find a little bit more about my business is canopystrategies.co, and I highlight .co because if you go to .com, it's going to take you to somebody else. But I'm canopystrategies.co.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you so much. So I've had people on here that have come up with pretty structural. This is what leadership is, and this is and you do so. I'm guessing what they're saying is that leadership is a science, whereas you're seeing that leadership is an art. So who's right?
I think we're both right in that there are examples. There are a set of skills and processes and things that you need to do as a leader to show up. You should have good conflict resolution skills or collaboration and negotiation and, demonstrate empathy. All of those things are the science of it, I guess, of just here's the rules. And everybody has a different list. Like there is not a list of these are the things that are, a leader does. There's probably one basic one, which is around respect.
Yes.
That's probably the only one, the common one. Why I talk about it as an art more than a science is because each person is different. Each situation is different. And I'm bringing my own style into it. So I have to think about how am I going to create the best environment to drive, help motivate and engage this person and get them to make the impact. And oh, by the way, their motivation might be different than mine.
And
how am I going to do that?
And I think that's a fundamental, which is the fact that, whatever you're doing as a leader, the person that's turning up that day had a puncture on the way to work. Their parent has gone into end of life. Their child is failing exactly, and they turn up with all of those things. COVID has actually meant that we're more closer to the to the home person and the work person, but you still may not know any of those things.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that I know when we talked before that you said that dealing with people was messy.
It is because, for all those reasons, like I, as the leader, come with all the set of experiences I have, how I was raised, what I think is right or wrong, how I react to things. So I'm messy. That's my mess that I have to bring to work and figure out how do I show up in a way that is productive. And then I have a team and they all have their unique circumstances of how they grew up, what motivates them, how they respond to things. And my job is to figure out how do I harness all the individual messiness of myself and them to drive business impact.
Yes. So how is it that we get a handle on this? What is it that we need to do, or what is it, and what is it do we not need to do?
Well, I think that the not do is the easy part. There's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the easy part. So that's okay. Then what does that mean? That means you have to know you have to know yourself and know where you show up. I talked about the imperfection gremlins. What's your thing?
The imperfection
gremlins.
Gremlins. Yeah.
Yeah. That, mine, when I'm under stress, it's being a controller. I want to control the whole situation and be in the middle of it all. And so in order to resolve this, so stop trying for the cookie cutter. And then it's around knowing each person and how do I get the best from them? What is, as much as they're willing to share, because you've created a trusted environment already, what's going on in their life? What's their motivation? And how do I get that? And so I think COVID actually helped a bit with that because people slowed down, realized everybody's going through a ton of crud, to put it lightly, and that they might need to show that they cared and that they were more vulnerable. So I think it's slowing down to make sure you know who your team members are, building the trust so that they'll expose those parts, and then tapping into how do I get the best from Tim? And I often ask people in an interview, how am I going to get the best from you? Like, as a leader,
Good question. Yeah.
do I need to, be there all the time, or do you want to talk to me every 2 weeks?
Yeah. And I actually think that there's a certain amount of ebb and flow in terms of asking. So yesterday I met somebody that I've known for a couple of years, but I've known them online. And in the UK, we tend to have gone into a bit of into a hugging situation with people where, all of a sudden we sort of hug people. But I'm never so sure about it. So I actually said, do we shake hands or do we hug? And she said, don't touch me. And it was one of those things where you just don't know, because you just make an assumption. And I just think, and I was one of those things where I then thought to myself, I'm so glad I asked.
Okay. Yeah, there's usually, the curiosity of, is this the right thing, or how do I tap into this person, or what they're most comfortable with, is rarely going to serve you wrong. Because at least it's showing you care.
Yes.
Enough to ask the question, like, can we have this conversation? Can I hug you? Can I, just think about working hours. Can I text you, or is it okay to send emails at night?
Yes. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm a massive user of there's a facility on Slack where you can set a time for it to go. And I basically have a cutoff point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I run a global business, so I think in my time, but actually it may be in the afternoon for the people. But in effect, what I do is I have a cutoff point.
Well, and I think those boundaries are key for both you as a leader, but also for your team to know, here's the boundaries that I live with, and here's what I, expect from you, and help me understand, what you need yours to be.
Yeah, and I think those boundaries are. I think boundaries is a really important thing in leadership, to actually work out, and not to. I'm a founder of a company. So I'm really passionate about the company, probably more passionate about than other people. Therefore, yes, but in a way that the other side of that is the fact that people are going, well, I don't want to answer this at 8:00 at night, because it's not my company,
right?
And so it's about, for me, it's about, I've got to, as a leader, I've got to make sure that I'm placing the boundaries that I would expect if I was in their position.
That makes total sense. And I think in this environment right now, where people are feeling, I think we went from one extreme to another of just lots of meetings, and then COVID, and things in some ways were simpler, easier, though the meetings went up. And as the world started opening up, the meetings kept being at a really high percentage of people's time. And people struggle with figuring out where do they say no? And to some extent we say, well, you need to figure out your own personal boundaries. But culturally, in an organization or with a team leader, you might have to follow what they do. And if they're not asking, okay, do you work at night? Do you like to work at night, or not? Or how does it feel when I send a message at 8:00? Do you feel like you have to respond? I don't expect you to, but do you feel like you have to? Like, I was working with one team, and they were saying that the leader was like, I'm working, I'm, sending my messages. I don't expect you to respond until you come in the next morning. However, even though she had said that, the team felt like they needed to be checking.
Yes.
And so they moved more towards using the delay, on their emails to just mitigate that. Even though, set the expectation, I don't expect an answer unless and if I expect an answer real quick, I'm going to send you a text like that. If it's urgent, you'll get a text message, but don't check your Slack, don't check your Teams, don't check your email. Feel free to work when you want to work, but I'm not expecting it. And I'll contact you directly by phone or text if it's urgent.
And I think it's important that as individual contributors that we make our own boundaries, and we also are empowered to say no. My partner works for a big four consultancy organization, and they used to have a big culture about, Friday night you get a call, what are you doing at the weekend? Well, I'm doing this. Well, you're not anymore, you're working on a bid. And they don't have that anymore, and that's all stopped, and that is that's a massive change for that organization. If you think about it, if you think about the fact that you were able to actually call upon, they've got what, 300,000 people in the company, and you call upon 10% of that to work at weekends, and all of a sudden you're having to change that, and that's good.
I agree. I mean, I think the employee expectations changed as far as being able to say, hey, this isn't what I want. And organizationally, people started to listen as well, because to some extent, they're like, this isn't as productive as we could be. And so I think there's a difference. Like when I had young kids, it was like, I don't do calls I don't work from 5 to 7 or 4 to 6 or some variation, depending on how old my kids are. Like that's, unless it's urgent. And even then I'm like, is it really urgent at that time of the day? I need that time because it's the only time I see my kids.
Yes, and I think it's one of those things where it's like, as you say, like, is it really that urgent? I mean, does it really need to be done now?
Well, and I think we're our worst enemies on that. If
Yes.
somebody will ask, and the question that I don't think most of us remember to ask is, when do you need this by? We assume it's urgent for them. And often we find out realistically, if you get it to me by Friday night, that's fine. And you're like, oh, because what that ends up happening is we reprioritize our priorities for somebody else without confirming, is that really the more important priority? Because we want to serve and we want to be helpful and we want to be recognized for responsiveness.
Yeah, it's always that being in corporate where everything's a priority. So it's actually nothing's a priority because it actually all cancels each other out.
Right.
But as you know, if you are asking someone to do that, asking someone to do a task, then you should always give a deadline anyway, shouldn't you?
You should. And sometimes it's just, it's an email, hey, can you do this? And they don't say that. So we need to be more specific about what we need, when we need it. And I think then the other piece that I think many of us don't do really well is really clear expectations of what a finished product looks like. Whether from a performance perspective, like that's the biggest thing of just being able to have a shared agreement on what the final thing needs to look like. Even that, whether it's an email, whether it's a presentation, a pitch, whatever it is, we often don't get to that common expectation. And I think that's the other challenge of just how do you do this well with different people. So from an art perspective, in some situations, maybe a more junior person on the team, you might have to be pretty directive in your style of like, okay, here's the 5 steps I need you to follow in order to get this done. A more seasoned professional, you may want to say, here's what I want done. How are you thinking about it? You're going to have a more iterative and creative and
discussion around it.
Right.
And then also, and then delegating.
Yeah. And actually delegating it. I mean, truly giving ownership and accountability versus, hey, you go do the work. I'm going to take, responsibility for it. I'm going to own it. But I want you to, there are times that might be appropriate, but just if you're delegating it, are you delegating the authority to actually make the decisions? Yes. Or are you just saying, hey, I need you to do this task?
And what about in each of those situations, what about clarification in terms of because we're always in situations where you say something but I hear something different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I repeat this all the time. Brene Brown's statement of painting done. And so,
What's that?
because I love it, the visual. So if I say I need a picture of a man,
Yep.
so I need a painting of a man. And if I leave it at that, you might have your version of what that looks like,
It's just
whether, what kind of,
stick thing. Yeah.
stick figure, whether you crayons or acrylics or pastel or whatever, or you might use a photograph. I might want it framed with glass,
Mm.
in this kind of matting. So if we don't have that conversation of what painting done for me means, then you're going to go do your version. So it's on both of us, to ask the questions. So me as a leader to say, okay, this is my version of when this product is done, this presentation, whatever it is, this is what I need it to include. And the person to say, okay, I understand you need X, Y, and Z. What about this? How about that? And have that discussion back and forth. And then I would frankly confirm it in writing if it was complex, to say, as we talked about, here's the 5 things that you need for this to be, the finished quality product. This is good. And, great would be this.
And while we're talking about Brené Brown, we can't go without talking about vulnerability, can we?
No, not at all.
Because she is the queen of vulnerability.
She's the queen of vulnerability. And I think the silver lining with the pandemic is I think people have gotten a little more comfortable or forced into a level of vulnerability because of what was going on and just the stress that everybody at the same time was experiencing. I think there's a fine line that people bring up, like, is this like I show up and just let my hair hang out, like everything come out? And I don't think it's that. I think because there's also the movement around, like, bring your whole self to work.
Yeah.
And I think those two things taken to an extreme, aren't really the workplace, things that you want. However, if I'm a leader, I need to show who I am, what I believe in, and I need to be honest, I believe, to say, you know what, that thing didn't go this well today. You know what, here's where I think my accountability fell down on it. I need to be honest and vulnerable about saying, hey, I screwed up, or there's a major layoff coming, in an organization. I know this is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I am saddened that we have to let, key team members go. Like it's impacting me, not for somebody to feel sympathy towards me, but to say, hey, I'm human. Yes. And I think that's what in the past, particularly in big organizations like the one you were mentioning, I think it wasn't as acceptable to show up and be like, this is hard.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's a bit like, do you remember the crying CEO on LinkedIn? A guy that basically let people go and then went on LinkedIn and cried. Yeah. There's a fine line, and I think that you have to show your vulnerability, right? Because actually letting people go is really, really hard.
Yeah.
But it kind of got to the point where he kind of moved into the bragging part, or there's that put your big boy pants on,
yeah,
versus you're actually going to be vulnerable.
Well, and I think it gets the other piece that made me think about was just in the early days of the pandemic, you saw different ways CEOs and leaders showed up. Some leaders showed up and said, I don't know what the heck is going on. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what we're going to do, and said nothing. And so people made assumptions. You had some CEOs or leaders who said, I don't know what's going on. Here's what I do know. Here's how I'm going to continue to try and find out more and inform you. But I get that this is hard and it's confusing. Like, they showed their how they were feeling about it, but they also continue to engender trust in them as a leader, because they were honest to say, I don't have all the answers. I'll figure it out. Here's what I'm going to do once I figure it out. And we're going to go on this journey together. And I think that credibility I think there's that fine line of just, how do you show up as you,
Mm.
that is generates confidence, like that I want to follow you because you have shown your human side. You
Yeah.
have shown when you're excited about something that really went really well. You show when things are hard. You admit maybe there's something going on with your family, or that, hey, I'm gonna take this afternoon off because it's my daughter's singing competition.
Yeah.
Like, okay, those things, you show that those things matter. You're being vulnerable, that I don't have to be this, robot at work.
Yeah, I think we're all, well, I don't know, you know, generations change, but I think certainly when I grew up, there was a view about what leadership was, and it generally was like a suit and it was a box you were in.
Mm.
And gradually that's changed, and certainly showing vulnerability is quite revolutionary in
Yeah.
the leadership that I was being told 20 years ago. I'm being generous, I think, there.
And I think there was just much more command and control was the more
Yes.
standard. And what I have found fascinating, listening to Brene Brown and read the amount of work that she does with the military, where you expect that it is command and control, you wouldn't expect the vulnerability. And the reality is the opposite, that there's so much vulnerability because you're putting your life in the hands of these other people that you have to ultimately trust. And
Yes.
so I find that fascinating because you would think it would be the exact opposite.
I've now read all of her books. I got into I was recommended Dare to Lead,
Yeah.
and then I basically just went and bought all the others.
Yeah.
And it was that was the where the Marines said, actually we're totally vulnerable because there's a group, 10 people or whatever, and we're total, and my life is dependent on the other 9 doing
It's
what they
huge.
should be doing.
Yeah. So my hope in life, is that the leaders that have resisted shifting to vulnerability and have not moved away from the command and control mentality of, these are my employees, you should be happy to work for me. I hope that disappears soon.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, I believe work shouldn't suck, and work sucks because there are too many bad leaders still.
Yeah. And Melissa, that is a great point to finish on. Thank you for that. I totally agree with you, and I think that leadership is something that's going to continually change because people's expectations are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us are perfect at it, and every day when we get up, we should strive to get better.
Yeah, I'd say we're all imperfect leaders, but we can all be intentional leaders of how we show up.
Ooh, I like that. Intentional. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today. It goes so quickly. I
know, it was fun.
Well, it was. I really enjoyed it, Melissa. That's been fantastic. I could have actually talked for another hour, I think, because I find leadership as a fascinating subject. I've had a lot of people on here talking about it, and as I said at the beginning, I always get something out of it, and I've already made notes. So,
Good.
we can all get better. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
Sure. Find me on LinkedIn. I post content regularly on leadership topics, and canopystrategies.co.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on, and let's keep in touch.
Sounds good.